On Sunday the 31st of December, just over 2 weeks ago, a 20-year-old man from Louisville, Kentucky named Delano Ray was supposed to be celebrating the turn of the new year with his friends, but after that night, he would mysteriously fail to return home. Initially, his parents had asked him to attend a church service together, but Delano declined as he had already made plans, so eventually his parents left for the night, and Delano booked a zTrip taxi to take him over to his friend's house. However, when the driver pulled up outside, the young man apparently failed to show. According to the driver, he then attempted to call him 2 more times before ultimately giving up at 11 PM, where he switched off his meter and drove home. Delano's parents then returned home shortly after and weren't surprised to see that their son was out, as they had discussed earlier. But as the days went by with absolutely no contact from Delano, they understandably started to get concerned. Not long later, they called the Louisville Metro Police Department to report their son as missing, but after 2 weeks of searching, the 20-year-old man is still yet to be found. However, in a shocking twist, it was recently revealed by the zTrip taxi service themselves that the statements made by their driver did not match the meter readings from that night. So, with the extremely controversial details that surround this case, it's no surprise that many are starting to wonder what really happened to Delano Ray, and could he be Kentucky's next victim of human trafficking? Delano Ray was born in the year 2003 in the town of Bowling Green in Kentucky to his loving mother Clara Sloan alongside his 2 siblings. Growing up, friends would describe him as the sweetest child, and so with this kind and generous personality, it's no shock that he was always somebody that other people tended to gravitate towards. In addition, his family were quite religious, so this was also something that Delano adopted from a very young age, where he would participate in services and acted as a devoted member of his church. However, due to the lack of media attention surrounding this case, little else is known about his childhood, but from what I was able to gather, Delano would eventually move to the neighbouring city of Louisville, where his family would eventually settle on the outskirts in a place called Jeffersontown, otherwise known as J-Town. At this point, we can only speculate on how this transition affected Delano, but by all available accounts, it would seem he took this new adventure in his stride, with the young man immediately making friends in the local area. These friendships would then naturally lead to several invitations to parties, to which Delano was a frequent attendee as somebody who enjoyed socializing and having a good time. However, it was one of these seemingly innocent parties that would eventually lead to a mysterious event that would leave his family with an inconceivable amount of worry when Delano would decide to celebrate New Year's Eve with his friends, never to be seen again. On Sunday the 31st of December, the 20-year-old man was preparing for a New Year's Eve party that he had planned with his friend. At the time, he was getting ready in his bedroom when his parents knocked on the door to ask if he would be attending the church service that night. But given the plans he had made earlier, Delano wanted to arrive at his friend's house early, so told his parents that he wouldn't be able to attend, to which they understood and accepted his decision. Delano then opened his phone and searched for the zTrip taxi service and booked a ride for around 11 PM that evening. Soon after, his parents said their goodbyes as they headed out the door, and Delano continued getting ready for the night ahead. The minutes ticked by, and soon enough the zTrip taxi pulled up outside the Jeffersontown residence, and the driver pulled out his phone to announce his arrival. However, upon alerting Delano that he was outside, strangely there was no response on the app. So confused and getting impatient, the driver then contacted Delano's cell phone to see if he could get a response. The first call continued to ring and eventually went to voicemail, to which the driver's frustration only grew. But refusing to give up, he waited and hoped that his passenger was just running late and would be out soon. However, after a few more minutes passed with still no sign of Delano, the driver pulled out his phone once again and attempted to contact his soon-to-be customer, but just as before, the call would go to voicemail. Well, refusing to waste any more of his time, the driver finally gave up at around 11 PM when he turned off his meter and started driving home, assuming Delano had perhaps made a drunken mistake, given that it was New Year's Eve after all. However, little did he know at the time that Delano hadn't just made a simple mistake, but rather he was never destined to get in that car, as after that night, the 20-year-old man was never seen again. On Monday the 1st of January, Delano's parents arrived home in the early hours of the morning, but initially weren't too surprised to see that he wasn't home. After all, they knew he would more than likely be staying over at his friend's house after the celebrations, so there was no reason to be concerned at the time. However, as the days passed, with both Delano's family and friends claiming that the young man had not been responding to his messages, the lack of concern quickly transformed into dread, as danger started to surround his sudden absence. Well, after numerous failed attempts to contact Delano, his mother Clara eventually felt that she had no other option than to officially report her son as missing to the Louisville Metro Police Department, and with that, the search was on. The next day, the Ray family, alongside the local authorities, then commenced their investigation and immediately set out to speak to the zTrip driver who was supposed to be picking up Delano the night he disappeared. The detectives then asked him which address he took Delano to. However, they were concerned to hear that he hadn't even picked up the young man, as he was claiming to have turned his meter off at 11 PM when Delano failed to respond to his phone calls. Now, given that this driver worked for a legitimate company that was very prevalent in the local area, the police initially took this statement as truth, given that the driver would have been tracked the entire time, and so the likelihood of him being involved was incredibly slim. The police then turned their sights on Delano's friends and began asking them what they knew about the disappearance, hoping that they would be able to provide some useful insights into the case. But unfortunately, it would seem that these conversations would remain fruitless, with Delano's friends failing to provide any valuable evidence that would push the case forward. However, after contacting zTrip themselves, the police would soon uncover a harrowing piece of information that would completely change the course of the investigation. On Sunday the 7th of January, exactly 1 week after Delano mysteriously disappeared, the Louisville Metro PD announced that they had discovered some incredibly suspicious information from the zTrip taxi service that may have pointed the finger back at the driver who was supposed to be picking up Delano on New Year's Eve. According to the company, after looking into their meter readings from that night, they could clearly see that the driver still had his meter on at the time Delano was supposed to be picked up at 11 PM. But to make matters even worse, zTrip also reported that the driver had completed the ride, likely dropping Delano off at his chosen destination. At the time, the company did not realize that their driver had given a different statement to the police, so as far as they were concerned, this information would remove suspicion away from their business. But little did they know, they had actually turned the scope of guilt firmly back on themselves, and more accurately, their driver, as the police now had a liar on their hands, and were extremely suspicious as to why he would give a false statement. The investigators then quickly set up an interrogation with the zTrip driver to see if they could uncover why he was being untruthful, and to see if they could coax a confession out of him. But as far as I can tell from my research, no conclusions have been drawn as of yet, so it would seem, at least for now, that the driver is still innocent until proven guilty. Now, unfortunately, given that this is still a very new case, with Delano only being missing for just over 2 weeks, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. However, authorities are still awaiting the address location from zTrip to determine Delano's last location, and with this update in the case, you would hope that some extremely useful information will arise in the coming days. But given that the young man still hasn't been located after uncovering so much valuable evidence, the likelihood of his safe return is looking more and more bleak as each day passes. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, as usual, I will attempt to begin this portion of the video by contemplating the best case scenario here, as I think it's important to remember that happy endings are always possible, no matter how bleak the circumstances may seem. So with this in mind, could Delano simply be hiding out somewhere in Kentucky, as he doesn't want to be found? Well, as I previously mentioned, this is still a very early case, and there hasn't been too much media attention surrounding it. So if Delano was hiding away somewhere, he may not realise just how much worry he's caused the community. Outside of a few Facebook posts and news reports, there really isn't too much conversation about his absence. So before we assume that Delano would have to be aware of the trouble his absence has caused, keep in mind that this may not be true. What if he has decided to stay over with a friend from out of town, perhaps one from his hometown of Bowling Green? You'd think that the police would have looked here already, but given that the investigation is still so fresh, it's very possible that they haven't. Also, due to Delano's age being officially classified as an adult, the Louisville Metro PD have been unable to get the necessary warrants to search for his last cell phone ping. So it's currently impossible to confirm his last known whereabouts to an accurate degree. However, in addition to this, it would also seem that the investigators are still yet to check any traffic cameras, put together a search party, or even post a missing person report on their social media pages, which in my opinion seems very suspicious. Perhaps they know something we don't, but either way, there's no real way of knowing until somebody comes forward with more information on the case. But for the time being, given that Delano's family are still actively asking for help on Facebook, I think it would be useful to look at some of the other possible theories behind his strange disappearance, and what better place is there to start than the zTrip driver that apparently lied to the police. So before we go into why this man was being untruthful, who actually was this person in question? Well, it's impossible to find any information online about this suspect, so it would seem the police are keeping these details tightly guarded. But at the very least, we know he was an official employee of zTrip, and therefore he would have likely passed all background checks that were conducted by the company themselves. So perhaps a better question to ask at this point would be, who are zTrip, and how trustworthy are they as a business? Well, if you look them up online, you will see that they are a fully fledged taxi service that operate in multiple states across America. Their LinkedIn page reads, zTrip is a new smartphone app that lets you book a black car or taxi in seconds. You can book for now, later today, or later this week. Our service is backed by over 25 years of trusted customer support and professionally licensed and insured drivers. So based on this, it would seem that the company are certainly not the sketchy taxi service they might appear to be. So you'd assume that they would have surely conducted the necessary background checks before working with the driver that lied to the police. But even if we remove any blame towards zTrip, that doesn't mean that their drivers also conduct themselves in the same professional manner. So going forward, I think it would be wise to switch our focus mainly on the driver, as opposed to the company he works for. So, could the driver have actually been behind Delano's strange disappearance that night? Well, it's certainly possible, and by lying to the police, perhaps he thought this would buy him some time while he came up with a more detailed alibi. Surely he knew that his statements would be checked over with the company, so he would have to be a complete moron to think this would end well. That is, unless he had a good reason to lie. After all, as far as we're aware, he has still not been convicted of anything, and therefore we have to keep an open mind to other possibilities while the police conduct their investigations. But even if the zTrip driver was guilty of a crime, the question that still remains is, why did he choose Delano as the victim? And more importantly, what could he have done with him? Well, there are of course a number of different possibilities. However, one of the more likely scenarios in my opinion is that the driver may have been involved in an underground human trafficking ring, and noticing that Delano was alone, he could have capitalized on the situation. There does seem to be a trend with young black men suddenly disappearing in modern times, and then are either found months later with their organs removed, or simply never seen again. Now, of course, there are many cases that do not end in this way, but these cases, more often than not, do not possess the same level of controversy as Delano's case, with the zTrip driver lying to the police about picking him up that night. I find it very hard to think of any situation where the driver would be innocent in this, as it would appear that he had absolutely no reason to lie, and therefore he must be trying to cover something up. Perhaps he knows somebody in the human trafficking business and decided to drop Delano off at an alternative residence. Or maybe the driver is more involved in the underground process than this. But either way, with so many young black men going missing as of late, I certainly wouldn't disregard the possibility that Delano could have been trafficked by an organisation. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, then you will know there have been several cases that I've covered in the past where human trafficking has been a huge possibility, such as in the case of Stephen Edwards, who was a 32-year-old New Yorker that suddenly disappeared last year without notifying his family, or even Jared Shadid, who disappeared last summer in Seattle, leaving all of his belongings behind, including his cell phone, at an Airbnb he was staying at. So based on cases such as these, I think it would be safe to say it's certainly not unheard of for young black men to disappear in America, never to be seen again. And one of the leading theories that always seems to be at the top of the list of explanations is human trafficking, more than likely through drug addiction. However, from my research, it would seem that unlike the other victims, Delano was a very well-behaved individual that certainly wouldn't desert his family with the prospect of gaining access to drugs. But one other method of recruitment these human traffickers use, that is becoming more and more prevalent in today's society, is entrapment through fake online dating profiles. The scheme works as follows. A man or woman posts an online profile claiming to be looking for love, or maybe even a casual hookup, and then, after matching with somebody who fits their intended victim profile, they agree to meet somewhere inconspicuous as to alleviate any risk or worry for the victim. But then, very quickly, this scene will suddenly turn dangerous, as another suspect will likely appear and start to threaten the victim into giving away their money and possessions. However, another less common result of these evil schemes is that some of these men are trapped and sold into the underground world of human trafficking. From here, they are either forced into horrific acts or are simply killed and sold off for their body parts, in a practice that is commonly referred to as organ harvesting. Now, of course, this is a very far-fetched theory, but one I feel we have to consider, given that Delano is still yet to be found after over 2 weeks of searching. But before I continue, one question we still have to ask ourselves is, how do we actually know that Delano would have been participating in online dating? Well, firstly, he is a 20-year-old man, and according to recent data, around 53% of adults aged 18 to 29 say they have used an online dating app or website in the past. Now keep in mind, these are just the people willing to admit it, as despite the practice being quite popular in today's society, there is still a stigma around online relationships that may lead survey takers to hide the truth of their online dating use. But either way, this is still a huge number of Americans using dating apps, and with Delano appearing to be single, it wouldn't be surprising to see that he had a few accounts. All we know from the police reports so far is that Delano was supposed to be meeting a friend, but as far as I can tell, this friend has not been identified. Could this have been a lie he told his parents to hide the fact that he was actually meeting a date for his New Year's celebrations instead? I must say, there is absolutely no hard evidence to show this. However, from my previous videos, almost every victim has used these dating accounts in the past, and it is almost always considered in the police's investigations. So even though we do not have any explicit evidence, I would still like to consider the possibility that Delano could have been lured out by a predator on that fateful night in December. 2 particular cases come to mind here. One being the harrowing story of Johannes Kadani, who was another young African American that tragically lost his life after telling friends and family that he was meeting a friend, only to go missing shortly after getting into an Uber. His body was later found deceased in the San Francisco Bay, with his death being ruled as self-infliction. However, the cause of death is still a highly debated topic on the internet. But nonetheless, could there be a hint in this case that may lead investigators to the truth in Delano's disappearance? The second case I wanted to mention was Leondre Flint, who once again was a young black man at the age of 21, when he declared to his parents he would be heading out for a few hours. In reality, he had been speaking to a girl online and decided to drive out of town to meet her, only to have his life taken shortly after by the very same girl, along with her 2 accomplices. Now, I truly hope that the same harrowing fate does not meet Delano. However, until we have more evidence, this is an unfortunate possibility that we need to keep in mind if we ever hope to bring this case to a close. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any theories of your own which you think may explain what happened to Delano Ray, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. The main reason that I covered this story is because Delano's family have been desperately reaching out to the public for help. So if you'd like to show your support, leaving a like or a comment is probably the easiest way. Because as you probably already know, the more interaction a video gets, the more exposure it tends to get on YouTube, and therefore the further the victim's story can spread. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, if you would like to hear more about the other cases that I featured in this video, including Stephen Edwards, Jared Shadid, Johannes Kodani or Leandre Flint, please feel free to check out the videos on screen now.